All right, folks, I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week, most recently at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We take about 45 minutes to an hour to talk about the latest generative AI news of the week, and we have a lot of great stories for you this week. You know, Llama's back in the headlines, a little deal with IBM. It's amazing how Meta is coming back. We'll talk a little bit about that, and particularly using open source generative AI to do it. We also have GPT-4, a suggestion from OpenAI to use it for moderation, but maybe not the type of moderation you might think initially. We have a number of new funding rounds: Anthropic, Voiceflow. We have an acquisition. We have a new kid on the block out of the West Coast too to talk about today. Amazon. We have Google. We have stories about Deepfake. So a lot going on today. And to break it all down, I have my colleague, Eric Schwartz, with me. Hey, Eric.
Hey, looking forward to hitting all these big stories.
All right. Eric is the head writer at voicebot.ai and someone who I believe has written more stories in generative AI than anybody else in the industry, certainly in conversational AI as well. And I did notice we have over 5,000 stories written in voicebot.ai. And Eric has more stories than I do these days. I think I only have around 15 to 1,600 of those. So there you go. Eric is the font of wisdom, and we'll get right into this. And I think, Eric, the top story this week, or I think one of the most interesting stories of this week, and I wanted to feature it, was that OpenAI came out with this blog post that suggests that you use GPT-4 to moderate your GPT-4 based applications or your other large language model applications. And one of the things I thought was very interesting about it is OpenAI generally, they put out announcements about their product. They don't generally put out announcements around some sort of best practice or technique to use their product. And I'll give you, so that's like one thing. And I think some of the other things we'll talk about this in terms of what it is and what it is not, is it has this whole little flow chart about sort of what you're doing in terms of how to, think about the architecture for applying GPT-4 to moderation. And Synthedia did this helpful overlay of numbers, because otherwise, how would you figure out what's the order of operations here? I looked at it, I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. So we broke that all down, but there was a couple of things that I was thinking about here is like what it's not. And what it is not is it is not moderating, although you could potentially moderate. It's not moderating the output of the LLM. That's not what their focus of this is. And it's not about moderating, so hallucinations or the bad things that the LLM might say. What it is, and it's also not using it to moderate social media spaces or things like that, although potentially could be used for that. It's about moderating the inputs. And it's actually a little interesting because the video that they had describing it actually makes you think that it's about, and they show this chart, which would really about moderators who are looking at things basically that have already been put up. But no, that's not what it's about. It's about this idea of training a model based on your policies, your content policies, and then scoring the prompts to see if they are acceptable use or not. And if they're not, then it would, you'd obviously come back with a message to them. We don't do that or something like it. But the first thing it needs to do is do this filtering. Is this prompt okay?
Yeah, it's funny. These terms are there are all these technical terms that are then used by the general public, and sometimes they're not always the same. And I feel like, honestly, in terms of content moderation, there should be one specifically for these definitions, so they can make sure that people are using the term correctly. But I think OpenAI is not wrong in terms of what the AI could do as a content moderator for these kinds of inputs. But I don't know. I question how much fine tuning would be necessary in order for it to parse the acceptable from the unacceptable when the distinction is not very obvious, when it's not very obviously something that shouldn't be going in, if it's something that's on the margins.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Dave Gerbino, who just rolled into the YouTube live stream. I know there's a bunch of people on LinkedIn as well. Let us know if you're out there. Make comments on this as well. We'll incorporate them in the show, ask questions. All those things are welcome here at Gain. That's why we do this live. So, yeah, I think this is really interesting. And one of the points that I brought out in the Synthedia article was that we're talking a lot about the LLM outputs, and that is actually important. And you're going to have content and policy guidelines associated with what's appropriate for the LLM to talk about on the back end, and you might want to do some analysis of that. Is this appropriate? That's in addition to the hallucination checking, which is truthfulness. We got to think about appropriateness as well as truthfulness on the back end. And these same techniques that they're using to identify appropriateness, moderation, for the inputs, the prompts, they could use for the outputs from the LLM to make sure that it stays within the guardrails. In fact, that's essentially, that's one of the ways the guardrails actually work. But there's less conversation about the idea of putting guardrails or moderation around the inputs. And you would think about this more in terms of like social media, because user-generated content is something that needs to be moderated. Now, is that algorithmically, or the human reviewers, or there other types of automatic stops? All these techniques actually exist in the social media space. In the large language model space, generative AI space, there is this co-creation element. So the prompt is kind of like UGC, and most of the examples are like, making bombs or other types of violence or things that the model doesn't want you to ask about because it doesn't want to answer about it. It's like out of scope for what they will do. So that's the idea there. But there's also this idea of security, which is going to start coming up really significantly, because there might be some things, not just like it would be uncomfortable or outside your policy, but there might be some things that people attempt to do with prompts in order to violate security along these lines too. So I think this is going to become a bigger issue going forward, and I'm kind of happy they did this. Oh, there's one other thing too, I'll just throw in and I'll throw it back to you to close it out. They talk about this idea you can use GPT-4, which is like very good to train essentially, and it creates this prediction model about whether something is in or outside of the policy guidance. But then you use that to train a smaller model which then can be your moderator, your automated inline moderator for this identification. And why would you do that? Because, well, GPT-4 is kind of slow. But more importantly, what they're talking about is lower cost. And you want to save on all those inference costs. And these smaller models are just far cheaper to run.
Yeah, that concept makes sense of having these sort of micro monitoring, and then obviously with the ability to toss things up the chain as though it were, human moderation system. I think this is going to be important, but it does have that weird sort of like, speaking of security, it's like, you want to make sure people aren't putting in proprietary information, but that means somehow you have to train it to spot proprietary information, which feels like a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did somewhere I did put in, I think, one of these posts, GPT $$ instead of the number, because it is interesting. Alan Furstenberg just said, so an LLM to watch the output of the LLM. Do we need an LLM to watch the LLM that watches the output? And the answer is yes, exactly. It's so, isn't this amazing? We're implementing all these LLM-based solutions, and they have potential problems. And what's the solution? Another LLM. So always good that we're just one step ahead of these problems that people have that we're creating, but then we're solving. And it's actually all pretty benign, I think, for the most part. But I was happy to see that they did post it, because we should see some more of this sharing of best practices about how to do this and recommendations. And they have an incentive to do it, because this is going to be something that could be a blocker for systems going live. And if they then propose a solution to the blocker for going live, then they can get more people bringing systems live using GPT large language models, and all good for them. Okay, but there's another story here about adoption of large language models. And Eric, you had a story this week from some IBM data around what's going on in the enterprise. In fact, there's so much going on in the enterprise in terms of adoption, but why is that?
Yeah, there's a real excitement when we see so many stories about companies being excited to employ generative AI in different ways. Investment rounds that are seem out of proportion sometimes to the size of a company or where it's at in its product development. But there's evidence that there's just so much pressure in both the positive and potentially negative sense from all stakeholders in a company. It's not just the development teams that are pushing for it. It's the boards, it's the employees, it's the investors. They all are urging company executives to look for ways to bring generative AI into business models. And the data from IBM shows that the CEOs are just as happy to start bringing in. There's 69% of CEOs in this study said that they see broad benefits from generative AI across their organization. It's every source that might want to emphasize caution or slow things down, which is sometimes the case in certain industries or for certain kinds of technology. And generally speaking, all of the inputs that executives get says, go ahead, keep going,
right,
keep
exactly.
pushing into it. So
and the signals are strong. I mean, 2/3 of board members and just about 2/3 of investors, CEOs, 3,000 CEOs across the globe said, hey, I'm getting pressure from those two areas to implement generative AI in some way.
Yeah.
And also, interestingly, it's like 49% said that customers were pressuring them as well.
Yeah.
And you might wonder why customers are. Well, one of the things might be features, but the other thing is cost. And I've seen that. I've actually talked to some companies who are working with generative AI today, and they've already had customers ask them, how much of a discount do I get now that you're using generative AI? Because they know that there's going to be some productivity gains. And that's really where this comes from. And I think you have some articles coming up fairly soon about this. And this is going to be something we're going to talk a lot more about. We've been overwhelmed by the news, and the news has been very important. But over the next coming weeks, we're going to be talking a lot more about market data, because we're starting to see some data that actually is pretty useful, because it's based on behavior, not just based on forecasts. And so forecasts are okay because they're based on assumptions, and some of those can be tested. But when we start seeing behavior and we start seeing data that sort of indicates why behavior is taking place, that's going to be really interesting. So we have a lot of stuff I know that you're working on, Eric, to bring out over the next month on this front.
Yeah, it's definitely some indications that this is much more than the excitement over a new fad and that fades. This feels much more fundamentally.
I mean, how great is this? CEOs are always like, they always want to do these initiatives, and they have to convince their board, they have to convince their investors that they're spending their money wisely. 70% of CEOs want to do something with generative AI because they think they're going to get some sort of great benefit out of it. And oh, by the way, all their constituents, they want them to do it too. So this is one of the things where, if you think of organizational friction that can stop the adoption of new technologies, new techniques, processes, it's not there. In fact, it's like a organizational lubricant for driving adoption in this space.
Yeah, and it helps that a lot of, not everything about this technology, but there are many facets of it that are have an immediate impact or have very easy to grasp effects on a business.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not trying to convince people of some abstruse new technical thing that won't be obviously changing the business. So
immediate cost savings. Yeah, and we'll have a conversation next week, I think, about some people thinking that, like, that this market's in trouble and all that. The data I'm seeing suggests it's not, because people are spending money on this already. Okay, so, and another place that people are spending money is in the generative AI funding fountain. Boy, Anthropic shows up a lot, and the numbers always seem to be 9 figures.
Yeah.
So tell me what's going on here.
Yes. So Anthropic, the makers of Claude, they're a competitor for OpenAI. They've been sort of, they definitely don't have quite the headlines that ChatGPT is getting, but Claude is useful LLM. They garnered quite a lot of attention for having a gigantic context window, well beyond what anyone else was offering, and now they're getting another $100 million from SK Telecom. That's the telecommunications giant in South Korea, putting $100 million bucks into it from their venture capital group. And they've been working with Anthropic before, but now they're pushing for a multilingual LLM, so one that can communicate in not just in English, but also in Korean, as well as German, Japanese, Arabic, and Spanish. And SK Telecom has a lot of big ambitions. They've had a lot of ambitions every year. They're at CES talking about some big plan they have and some AI related goal. And they've been, as unsurprisingly, been pushing into generative AI. They worked with OpenAI to make a voice assistant using GPT-3, and now they're going sort of the level below and working on an LLM that can handle what they want to do in multiple languages. And they picked Anthropic to help make that happen, and are putting quite a lot of money into Anthropic to push for that creation.
And I think not just for consumer-facing application. I think there's the intent here is actually to provide services to other telecom providers. They're part of that alliance with Deutsche Telekom, and Singtel. And so they're trying to actually create this consortium, build tools based on generative AI that all the people in telecom can work. And I think that maybe one of the more significant indications here is something that I know a few of the people in the room today, watching, have been thinking about a lot, is where does this go? We talk all about these general purpose LLMs and how long before we shift into these domain specific or industry specific large language models. And this is a perfect example. Like you looked at like what Cohere did with Gannett, and they're trying to move towards an LLM that's fine-tuned for news media. We see Anthropic, this is going to be a great foundation for them to have some sort of LLM features that are really targeted towards telecom, which is obviously a very large industry. And it's a way for the company to really differentiate itself now beyond the large context window that has really low latency, which is good because that functional differentiation is good, but it might not be long-term sustainable. If they get embedded in some of these industries, it's going to be hard to kick them out.
Yeah. And I think for obvious reason, there's a focus from American companies on the American market and the European market, but and South Korea obviously has a huge tech startup and company base in general. So it's not necessarily thought of as an open market for American companies, but SK Telecom has the money and the reach and the infrastructure to really boost Anthropic's presence on the global stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really good news for them all the way down. Okay, so another story here. Our friends over at Voiceflow announced a new $15 million funding round. This brings their funding to $35 million. And this is on the back of a couple different things. I did a kind of a long write-up here. I know you did more of a news write-up, but I've been talking to the founder, Braden, about this since December, like days after ChatGPT came out, because we both sort of recognized that what this was going to do to conversational AI and his business in particular. But, if we look at it, they had, I think, around 65,000 registered users in December of 2022. They now have 130,000. They started rolling out or like testing and sharing beta LLM-based features for Voiceflow as early as December. And then they've done a number of things, rolling them out, moved some to production since then. And, they doubled their user base, and their active user base is up as well. So I've actually, I'm familiar with some of the things that are going on over there. They're getting a lot more activity on that. Now, that's Voiceflow, if you don't know, is a design tool that also has like runtime capabilities for conversational agents, conversational assistants. But most people, it started out really being more sort of this all-in-one package. But over the last couple of years, they've really specialized in this collaborative design for conversational agents. And they've got a lot of Fortune 500 companies. It's like a big enterprise business, or growing enterprise business in that way. But I think what's going to happen with some of these generative solutions is it's not only going to solidify their position at the design stage, but that's upstream of all the other activities for these conversational agents. I think a lot of people are going to start using them for runtime as well, or more and more they're going to start dipping into these runtime capabilities, which is a completely different market for them in terms of scale, and could actually drive a lot more activity. And so it's not surprising to me that they got another 50% lift in valuation.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed. Voiceflow was among the fastest, I would say, adopters who in the voice AI specifically space to see what generative AI could do, start experimenting with what it could do back in January, putting out prompt chaining tools and really looking for ways to, because part of their pitch had always been, you don't have to be an expert on the technical level or even necessarily on the design level. You have this idea of something you want to do. We can, our platform will make that very easy for you to break down and put together. And with generative AI, obviously that becomes even easier, and even when you're making very complex conversational AI. So I think that they're well positioned for what they're trying to do to reach more companies that have not figured out how to directly engage with generative AI.
And good stuff there. And so congrats to everybody over there. I'll be interested to see how that plays out. It actually shows that, some companies are actually navigating in the conversational AI space. Some companies are navigating, I think, this quite deftly, this shift to generative AI and how that's impacting it. Hey, if you're on LinkedIn, give me a like for that. Make a comment. Let me know where you're in from. Same on YouTube as well. We've got a few over there. I know we tend to get more people on LinkedIn watching live, but YouTube as well. Please give us a like. That really helps us. Shout out to Donald Buckley. He actually was commenting on our earlier story around organizational friction. And yeah, I get it. Media and entertainment. This is true. And I think this is true in a lot of industries. I was just talking to a very large PR firm, and a lot of the people in their organization are concerned about what these changes mean. And like, if you think about industries that deal with words like PR, like that actually makes a lot of sense. Ellen Furstenberg also has this really fun thing. And we'll just throw this in here because who doesn't need a little comic relief? LinkedIn transcription seems to be turning LLM into MLM. When he types, I don't have that problem. So Alan, it might be based on your use of LinkedIn and it's really optimizing for you. I'm not really sure, but everybody else out there, let us know where you're watching us from. Make a comment, but just let us know you're out there, because that's always fun.
And I will say Alan's thing right there points out that, it may cause problems in terms of over enthusiastic executives letting too many people go, but it's a reminder that as good as generative AI can be without any sort of extra effort, it's that extra 40-20% that humans bring to the process is still kind of necessary.
Absolutely, no question about it. I think there's a lot more to say on this, but let's leave it. Let's leave that where it is right now. So we have another, continuing with funding, because that's always a big thing. Dynamo FL. They raised $15 million. What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's a Series A funding. They're pretty new, but their angle is on the issue of privacy, especially for companies. I mean, we were talking about ways to prevent prompts that involve secure or private data. And as much as we said companies are really excited about generative AI, this is a central issue of how do you keep your company data private, your customers' data private if you interact with the consumers. And what Dynamo Flow does is work on ways of training these LLMs so that you can work on ways to train the LLMs on sensitive data, on proprietary data without compromising them by having it be put into the cloud or being used in a data set to train the next ChatGPT or whatever it may be. And especially with new regulations coming into effect in China and Europe and potentially the US in the not too distant future, having a way to employ LLMs without the obviously not wanting to compromise security, but also complying with all these new regulations is going to be, I think, a big business all on its own. So Dynamo Flow is getting money to make that a possibility.
Yeah, and I think this is along those idea of tools. We've been talking a lot about different type of tools that are emerging. So do we need tools if we don't have sort of the core capabilities, or people aren't sure? No, but as soon as we know that the core capabilities, really the foundation models, are going to start being adopted and take off, then we need a lot of tools. And so there's a lot of opportunities in this space. So I think that's really fascinating. I have another story here in the same vein, and some comments here. Hey, Johannes Dow, good to see you. Dave Garbino always watches on YouTube. He thinks LinkedIn is kind of trash for live streams, which I think the functionality is actually not as good, but there's a lot of people there and they like it. So that's one of the reasons we do it. But, we'll have there's a lot more people on LinkedIn right now than there are on YouTube, but that's okay. We love that. I love that comment by Dave. So another thing in this space, OpenAI made, I think this is their first acquisition, isn't it?
Yep.
And Global Illumination, they've said almost nothing about it other than like who the founders are. It kind of looks like an acqui-hire to me. I'm not sure they're buying any core technology. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely an acqui-hire. They specifically say that everyone there at Global Illumination, and they haven't said how much they paid for it, but they said they're bringing on everyone there, and they want the people there to work on, they say, their core products. And particularly, they seem really excited about the creative side of things. So Global Illumination is it's a design studio. They've made a bunch of different presentational tools and things, but they're probably best known for a online game called Biomes, which is a lot like Minecraft and very similar to Minecraft, but it's an open source game, an online an MMORPG, as to say. But it looks like whatever it is that is behind the scenes at Global Illumination obviously appeals to OpenAI. So this could be the start of the creative side of OpenAI, where they start putting together experiences and art tools that employ their technology, but are designed for people who maybe have played around with similar creative tools online, but haven't been available yet from OpenAI.
Yeah, and I think like the Instagram thing, I think was it Tom or Taylor? Tom Stimson, I think, was the one who was.
Tom Stimson,
was it Instagram? Like he created the algorithm for promoting things, and like, how does ChatGPT like up level in terms of daily active users, attention, all those other types of things? I have a feeling that his information or his experience in that space will be very useful, because if they want to make ChatGPT your go-to knowing assistant, Ellen and I had a little discussion about knowing and doing assistants not too long ago. Yeah, of course. Yeah, like someone from Instagram would be like a really good idea. However, I'm going to propose an alternative hypothesis. They may have just wanted this really cool website from Illumination. I just love the design style, the pixel faces and everything. So, if you think about it, this is exactly what OpenAI needs. Is they need a little bit of more avant-garde black and white pixel art, which actually was funny if you look back at what they did for their acquisition. They actually used pixel art.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. If you look at the background of how Tom Stimson at Instagram, he was the one who was making all of their works. He was the one who was putting together how to rank different stories, the reels and things like that. It's very fundamental toward figuring out what users are interested in, and therefore what else they might be interested in. And if ChatGPT has some capabilities like that in terms of predicting what it does, or what users might be interested in terms of what it does, then I think there's a lot of potential there, especially if Global Illumination and obviously Instagram very visual centered, ChatGPT not so much. So is this an indicator that OpenAI is looking at a broader multimedia plan? Then that wouldn't be totally shocking either.
I think it's like really interesting. I mean, like you could even say like, is there gaming coming along and things like that? I think that's less likely, but if you look at ChatGPT, it is their application front end, right? So it's like everything else is basically a capability, an API. So how do you get more attention? How do you get Instagram? So like promoting things, games, all these things are like well known. So I think that would be very cool. Now, that's the funding fountain. So there's always a lot of funding activity. We love to cover that. There's some other things that came up, but those are the ones we want to focus on this week. Let's go into the model garden. So what is that money, all that money out there doing? And from products and model standpoint, you have a story about Llama 2 and Meta and a new partnership with IBM.
Yeah. So if you have been following us for a few weeks, Llama 2 is Meta's new large language model. They created it basically open source. They've offered it to businesses without any licensing thing, or almost all businesses. and they've been distributing it through Microsoft. They've made other deals to put it into mobile devices with Qualcomm, and now IBM, who have been quietly but quickly working on making their AI, I guess, template, Watson, creating a generative AI version of that platform called Watson X, and putting together both their in-house and third-party LLMs, and now that includes Llama 2, which is a big boost both for Llama 2 and for Watson X, because now there's a lot more potential crossover on the enterprise level for companies that want to not have to pay a licensing fee, but also are used to working with IBM in some form. So
Yeah.
Could be a really strong synthesis of ideas there.
You know, big companies like to partner with other big companies. So IBM could have taken other open source models and put it in there. They could have put Falcon 40B in there. You know, Llama 2 obviously is very good. They're backed by FAIR, the research lab at Meta, that has Jan LeCun and other like leaders, we can say, in terms of leading innovators in the space. And it doesn't seem like there's any chance that they're not going to be investing in this for a long time. So it's really interesting too, because everybody's always afraid of Meta, like consumers for certain reasons, other businesses for certain, but all of a sudden it's like in this space, they're like, oh yeah, you're my friend. In fact, I like you better than OpenAI and Microsoft because they seem like, you know, the evil empire, and we need someone who's part of the rebel alliance to, you know, to counteract.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because IBM is in many ways, you know, a bit like Microsoft. It's just such a presence in the landscape of technology companies, and it feels a little like, not that they're scrambling necessarily, but it feels very much like they're having to move faster than they're usually comfortable with to compete. And you can see it just in how quickly Watson X, which just as a aside is not capitalized, which I find slightly annoying and confusing, but it's clearly being produced and updated sort of in real time. It's not a product that was available that they put together and then put out. It's that they put it out and then are quickly trying to make it achieve its the goals that they have for it in public view. So that's definitely a change for IBM, I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so let's move on to our next story. Like, let's talk about another tech giant, Amazon. Boy, they're using generative AI. How are they going to be using it?
Yeah, I think a lot of us sort of saw this coming. It's such an obvious way to combine a lot of data that Amazon has, that in terms of customer reviews, with generative AI summarizing what the reviews say. So instead of having to sort through individual reviews and, you know, the various formats and styles that might be annoying or difficult to get through sometimes, Amazon's using AI to look for all the key elements that are in all or most of the reviews and create just a single paragraph. And of course, you can still go through individual reviews and look for certain keywords like performance and stability, but the idea is to make the reviews as concise as the product description would be at the top. So I don't know how good they'll be. It's certainly going to be easier when if it's an Echo that has so many reviews that it's probably easier to create a general look, a capsule summary of all those reviews than it is for something that only has 4 or 5 reviews from people who are either really into it or really hate it. So I'll be curious to see just how many products actually end up getting a review.
Yeah, so I just think this is like a really useful tool. I mean, like, we've all done this. We're like, there's so many different competing products on Amazon. Summarization is a killer app of large language models. Wherever there's a lot of text, if you can do summarization on it, it usually gives you some sort of benefit. And sometimes you're just like, how many reviews do I have to look at to figure out what the key themes are? Could I just look at 5-star reviews? Could I just look at 1-star reviews? Right now, as a large language model myself, I do that and I sort of interpret it and I make a decision based on it and move on. So I think it's like pretty straightforward. Of course, Amazon's going to do this. I just did a big piece around Amazon's overall strategy around generative AI, but that didn't even get into the application features. And Jassy has already said that like every group at Amazon is working on something with generative AI. This is a perfect example. It's just like take a generative AI model, apply it to something, give a new feature for your users. Okay. So another big company that is rolling out generative AI features in their products that have been around for a long time is our friends at Google. And we know about Google SGE, Search Engine Experience, and how that competes with ChatGPT and Perplexity. What's going on with the new feature rollout?
Yeah, so Google has been pushing out generative AI all over the place, not just in Bard, but as but making it an element in other features. So in this case, it covers definitions. So the idea is that you can highlight individual words and see what they mean without having to, look them up or do a specific Google search, which is a feature you see from things like Grammarly, and it's certainly not unhelpful in this context. And then for people doing code, you can get more information about what code does. Again, the highlighting system is involved there, but just trying to really simplify or streamline the process of figuring out what you want to do, how to code it, or what the code says and what it will actually do. Makes sense there. And then, the search
third one isn't the third one the most interesting?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, going back to the summaries, I think, yes, the idea that you can summarize a website or long content is really good for certain subjects, but Google makes it seem like they're doing a favor for the content creators by making it so that people will want to go look at their longer thing by first seeing the summary. But I question whether it's people will look at the summary and then feel like they don't have to look at the actual content that people spend a lot of time putting together.
Okay. So let's talk about this for just a moment. This change, this is actually, I think, good for readers or web surfers, consumers who are like looking at web pages, because so many marketers try to obfuscate, intentionally or unintentionally, what's going on in their web page. And also many of them put very few words. They want to be like the Instagram of web pages. And so it makes it even harder to figure out what's going without having to commit to watching a video or something like that, which is not fun. So, if we look at that type of concept and we say, oh, they're going to start summarizing web pages. Now, this isn't actually new. Google Edge will do this already in Microsoft Bing. With Microsoft Bing on the side, we'll do summarization. But this is going to fundamentally change not just search engine optimization, because there's other aspects to that, but how we think about what the layout and content should be on a web page. We've moved from lots of words to fewer words and more diagrams. But if we're doing the summarization type of thing, we might actually need to start bringing more words in. Otherwise, there's a chance that it gets mischaracterized. There's a chance that people don't actually see the ideas. This is like a whole new idea of keywords, because it's not just keywords to get someone to your site. It's keywords when they're on your site in order to get them to stay or to move forward.
Yeah, and I think of it, in its best form, I think of it as the abstract to a scientific paper, where before you wade through what can be very technical or complex, you get an overall, here's what we were looking for, here's what we did, here's what we found in a few sentences. But I think, and I think that it is useful, but it's, I don't know, it kind of makes me think of if you're, depending on the content, I guess it really does depend, but it makes me think about doing a book report by reading the back of the book before.
Yeah, but I get it, but you and I look at a lot of websites, and it's offensive at how poorly marketers treat us, because we're trying to find something really quickly. So not only is navigation always hidden and the things you really want to find, but sometimes we just Dynamo FL, okay, who are these people? Let's go to their website. Let's figure it out really quickly. If I can get a short summary, then I can figure out what I need to do next faster. And it might bypass this. And I think that, Alan had an interesting comment about why the New York Times and AP don't want LLMs to hit their sites, because, if I am a long form content site and they're summarizing it, maybe they get to my page and they don't click around, they don't read the full thing. So I think that's potentially an interesting point as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think Alan's right. I think it's the difference between a headline that teases you about what's in there versus a clickbait headline which promises something that's definitely not there.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. And it's just a way for us to validate it as well. And by the way, we publish, we have over 5,000 articles on voicebot.ai. We've got 300 on our Synthedia Substack. Bring it on. Summarize all that stuff, because I think that we do a lot of long form, and I want people to come away with the idea of what it is when they come to the website, when they come to the actual article page. And if that provides them a service to give them a summary and they know whether they want to click through or not, or to like read the whole thing, I have really no problem with that. And it's really going to be incumbent on us to figure out the best way to present that information so that it does actually get summarized properly. And so it's almost like Google and Bing could wind up becoming the Axios for actual long form journalism. Because Axios, as everybody knows, just like, here are the bullet points. Here's what you need to know. Move on. Snackable content. When a lot of times that like overlooks a lot of the nuance that's in there. And so, maybe for people like us who write more in-depth stories, this will actually be good. It'll give them the little Axios style summary when they get to the page, and then they'll know, oh, this is a place that I need to go and look for more information.
Yeah, and it's funny in journalism training for online journalism, especially, we learn a lot about search engine optimization and the necessity of having a brief 2-sentence summary of what your story is at the top before you actually start exploring it, because not just for the reader, but for the search engine, if people are looking for a topic. And I wonder, is this going to mean that, on the optimistic side says that, oh, you can do a lot more narrative journalism because that summary bit is taken care of for you without you having to do anything. And the negative side is that, oh, they'll see that, then realize that you're telling a bigger story and decide to skip ahead. So it's the tension, as always, between good writing and writing designed to mislead you, as we talk about with marketing, especially in clickbait.
Yeah, so much of that. David Garbino also had a little shout out for Google SGE. He thinks it's good, and he's actually using Perplexity less. And I presume that's because Google SGE is actually up their game a bit. So that's very good. We have another story here that we want to talk about. We'll think about this sort of big organizations looking at generative AI. U.S. Department of Defense, they have a new task force out. What's happening with this new task force? And nice artwork there, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I always try to put a link to the generative AI behind these when I use synthetic images, and I was particularly proud of that one. Not gonna lie, it shows I'm being trained to write prompts better, basically. But the DoD has an official task force called Task Force Llama. That's all about looking at how the Pentagon can engage with generative AI, both in terms of how it can be used and also threats that it might represent when used by others, and problems that might arise from trying to integrate it into their own technology. We've seen before, the DoD is, DARPA obviously is constantly ahead of that, but the DoD is very keen on making generative AI part of not just the obvious combat issue, but also improving how it runs in departments internally, how it offers healthcare to veterans, how it puts together policies on all kinds of subjects. It's not surprising. It's just the next step in the government employing this kind of a technology, this kind of AI. And I've written before about how it turns out that certainly other militaries are working with generative AI. Specifically, the Israeli military has been using generative AI for information processing, for target selection, and I think that we're going to see that it becomes a key component in all kinds of military applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I have much more to say on it. I think it's just like, okay, yeah, the government's doing this. It just shows like military is a place. You wouldn't have necessarily thought that when we were thinking about stable diffusion, but there's all sorts of different things. They're using AI a lot. Of course, they're going to have a task force along these lines. I looked at it. The one thing I will say is just like a side comment. I feel like some of the people that are involved in this from an organizational standpoint are not really all in on generative AI. They might be slightly skeptical. And so maybe that's a good thing. Maybe like the US DoD will be more circumspect about it than some of those CEOs that all want to like follow their board's directions and do something. Okay, so let's move from war games and other types of games. And that's with Roblox, and they're deploying their own generative AI infrastructure. Now, there's other things about Roblox. I think that the whole idea of their earnings call, most of the people were clued into this idea that they're going to add more tools to both for users, so in games, so that they can actually have these new features like create their own fashion, as opposed to just buying a skin or something like that from a store. But also like developers and designers are able to create more effectively. But I was interested in something else. And this is, they are running their own generative AI infrastructure. Okay. So they're not using OpenAI, at least that's what they're saying. And this is the CEO said, we mentioned that we're really making impressive gains in both quality and cost throughout our safety systems and all types of assets, which is live. We mentioned that we're building our own model internally and running our own inference on voice safety internally on search. We're live. We have a lot of 3D generative coming, and we're moving to creation everywhere in our avatar project. And they're saving money. They've got 70 machine learning models in their stack right now. So this is also interesting. So we think about these big foundation models, but we also talk that are proprietary, like OpenAI and Google and Anthropic. But then we also have these open source models like Meta. And this is one of the places where this is going to come up, is that a lot of these organizations that have a lot of monthly active users, I can't remember what theirs is, it's over 100 million monthly active users for Roblox. It's going to be too expensive to run inference on all of these interactions. And so they actually have to figure out a way to do it themselves and do it on smaller models.
Yeah. And one thing that Roblox over the years, I think, has demonstrated is that the price versus quality dynamic, where it's the assumption is you pay more, you get better quality, you pay less, you get worse quality, is not always the case. And that you can have, Roblox has a lot of genuinely very impressive creations built with relatively cheap tools, and generative AI makes that even easier and offers opportunities for developers or game designers who maybe don't have a lot of money or a lot of resources to create really impressive stuff using some of the tools that Roblox has already rolled out. And again, with their own infrastructure, that means that they can explore potential ways of using generative AI that would not be as easy to do if they're working with a third party. So I think you're going to see generative AI become a huge part of Roblox and potentially other game as well.
Like we've talked about it, like Unity is already doing things. Unreal, there's a lot of companies. InWorld just did a big announcement, and they're a key, essentially, tool provider to the space. We displayed we showed some stuff from Convey recently in the space. So there's a lot going on in that space. So I think it's like unquestionable. But I do like it. It's just instructive. It's kind of like the Anthropic story looks like a funding story, but it's also a domain specialization story around foundation models. And this one is a generative AI story and has a lot of different angles. One is big companies going to be running their own models.
Yeah, I will say that CEOs, if you can tell he was talking himself and not using an LLM, because when trying to describe something optimistic this way, the go-to would not be Westworld, the
I know. Yeah,
famously
I didn't even put that in ours. Everyone was talking about Westworld, but he's just like, I'm like, oh, geez, really? You want to create a dystopian future starting with Roblox? That's perfect.
Yeah, I do reference that in my news piece about it, just because it's such a go-to example for so many AI developers, when the whole point of it is to, in a way, it's good. It's a lesson about using this technology carefully and well, but I don't know if the people who are excited about this technology are thinking about, but let's think about Westworld as a cautionary tale rather than as a utopian idea.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to answer a quick question that's on the screen, and then we are going to do one more story on deepfake detection, which I think is super interesting. But before I do that, and then after that, what we're going to do is winners and losers of the week. So what I want to tell you is, if you think there are some generative AI winners or losers of the week, put that in the comments, and we'll try to talk about that very briefly. I want to answer, I think it's Eliza, or maybe it's Eliza's question, but I'm actually going to swap it out really quickly first, because I'm going to do it in just a second. But Jürgen Gravestein had this comment: to be fair, Westworld was a legendary series and way ahead of its time. Absolutely. Always true. It's like it's in some ways it's a great analogy. It's just like I'm just wondering if that's the brand that they want to bring up. So Eliza Carpio asked, with all these current uses and future potential, do you think that people in general will need to get prompt training to leverage generative AI better? And Eric, want to field that?
Yes, but I think the prompt training will be for technical or specific verticals, maybe. But I think it's going to be how different generations are better at using Google and search engines. It's just if you're using it a lot when you're young, you're going to learn certain habits and start to understand certain things and employ them. And anymore, but even I can tell the way I write prompts has shifted, and I've gotten a lot better at figuring out what's necessary to put in, what I don't need to put in, or what I should add to refine something. So
absolutely, 100% agree. Yes, get some training, but actually learn by doing. Just like practice a lot, and you'll learn a lot. But a little bit of training goes a long way. In fact, you might actually even see some resources from us coming out on this pretty soon, because so many people have asked about it. But I want to just hit on our last story here. We just did a post a couple days ago around detecting deepfakes and Pindrop. So Pindrop Security, some of you know them, but they are they're kind of a giant in the enterprise space. And so if you're not working in contact centers and not doing like voice authentication, you probably wouldn't know them. But actually, they've been working on deepfake detections for 9 years, I think it is. They've got a number of patents in the space. And Amit Gupta, who's the head of product for that, he actually used Synthedia to show a beta release. It's never been shown anywhere before. So there's a video out there. You can look at VoiceBot's YouTube channel, or you can look in Synthedia and you just click through from there, which is very cool to see like how they're actually detecting voices. They've got some other technology as well, but determining whether it's actually live, whether it's recorded, whether it's synthetic. There's all these different things. But there's one thing I want to point out, because I think it's always nice to sort of educate people about the space. When we think of deepfakes, it's not just like one thing. It's not just like visual. It's not just voice. There's different levels of sophistication. And actually, Ahmed actually broke that out in this talk, which I thought was really interesting, because they've got some very basic types of things around just like someone just getting a recording of your voice. And there's a certain number of techniques to determine what that is. There's something else where they have like a synthetic voice clone of yours using text to speech, coming in. There's other things like even a little bit deeper where they're doing like real-time voice changing. And so it has this liveness, this real-time liveness of a human speaking, but then there's this real-time also voice changing going on to make it sound like something else. And then there's, and actually the difference between some of those two is like with the TTS ones, they've been doing these types of detections for a while. They can hear people typing in the background. Like they pick that up because they listen to all the track, and they like that's another signal, just not just the thing. And then, we get to these really more complex ideas of like taking someone's voice and using it for all these types of fraud attacks. And so in any event, this idea that there's multiple attack types, I thought was really interesting. So when you hear deepfake detection, you can go look at their demo in that video, but at the same time, don't just think deepfake detection is one thing. It's actually many things.
Yeah, I think detecting deepfakes is and will be an even bigger business, and I think that the complexity not only of the technology but how it's employed means that what Pindrop's doing is exactly where demand is going to be. And I also think that it's not like they're going to be the only ones pursuing this, but we're going to see more and more stories of deepfakes being used fraudulently. We're going to see more and more stories of deepfakes tricking people for, not necessarily malicious reasons, but yeah, exactly. We're going to see more of them. And I think that any company that can say, hey, we can help with that is going to get a lot of attention.
Okay, so winners and losers of the week. We're going to start out with someone from LinkedIn user. I'm not sure who that is, but you can let us know so you get credit for this. My loser of the week is Elon Musk for letting IBM beat him to an LLM with X in the name. Well, that's an X, yes. Yes, that is not by not by X.AI. It's not by Elon Musk. It's by IBM using Llama. And I'll go for a loser of the week will be, I think it's actually right now, I would say independent open source large language model foundation models. Because seeing IBM choose Llama, seeing Microsoft choose Llama, I know a lot of enterprises are looking at it. It's kind of like on the short list if you're thinking of doing your own model. I think if Meta gets more and more momentum here, it's going to be harder and harder for some of these open source models to break through. I do believe there will be a second open source large language model that emerges as sort of the key rival to Meta, because I think open source is big enough that people aren't just going to like say, oh, I'm just going to take the big tech version of open source models. So I think one will come up, and then everyone else will probably wind up specializing in these domains, just like Anthropic is starting to do. What are your thoughts in terms of loser of the week?
I think I'm going to have to go with Snapchat. They've been having some issues.
Oh, yes. Great point. Love that one.
Yeah, their My AI was not necessarily getting a lot of rave reviews to begin with, and recently has been facing more problems since then, and people complaining and not responding sometimes. I think I don't know what necessarily was going on with Snapchat, but I don't think their foray into generative AI has been particularly good.
Yeah, I think that's maybe it's just more publicity for them, which is very good. Okay, your winner of the week.
I'm going to have to go with, I mean, I've said them before, but every week there's another reason to say it, but NVIDIA. Everyone's really anticipating their quarterly reviews. The analysts are saying, oh, they're on the, they're going to be even bigger than ever. There's the UAE and Saudi Arabia are apparently like competing to bid higher and higher to get as many NVIDIA chips as they can. The future is looking rosier than ever for NVIDIA, which is, again, not shocking, but just every week there's more reasons to say they're a major winner of generative
AI. Great point. I like that. Those are two good ones. I'm going to stick with also one of our stories this week. In fact, the one we just did. I think we're all going to benefit here because we look at deepfakes and the potential, like we've seen a lot of good, but the potential for bad has been sort of hanging over there. We're starting to see a lot more stuff. So it's kind of an arms race in order to do detection as fast as the capabilities are coming out. So I'm going to say, being able to see that demo working live, and some other things that I actually know are going to come out from them, I think we're all going to be better off because from a deepfake detection standpoint, what Pindrop is doing is they're showing that their company, there's some others in the space as well, are actually starting to get ahead of this process. And I think we just have this idea that it's going to be part of the security stack of every company. And I think there's going to be a lot of tools for individual consumers as well coming out where we'll be able to automatically identify if we see a deepfake somewhere. So I'm really happy this is going to be happening. I think it's going to go across banking, insurance, healthcare, media. It's going to be a big thing next year. So that's my winner of the week. So Eric Schwartz, thanks for joining us this week.
Of course.
Once again and weighing in. Thank you, everybody who is out there for weighing in, asking your questions, making comments. Come back next week at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And by the way, don't forget, sign up for Synthedia for the newsletter. Also, subscribe to this YouTube channel. We've got some new things coming out. Eric's doing a lot more stuff on data. We actually have some reports and some more data coming out. So it's going to be pretty heavy over the next 6 weeks or so on that front. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Thank you, Dave Grubino, too, for being here and all your comments. I appreciate it. All right, folks, I think that's it for this week. I'm going to sign out. I'm Brett Kinsella, host of the Gain Show, Generative AI News Rundown, founder of Voicebot.ai and Synthedia, and Eric, my colleague, is the head writer and one of the most erudite observers of the generative AI space. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.